Good morning. Today we're talking about sea otters and how sea otters are what's known as a keystone species. So what I have here is an image of a food web for like a coral reef, not coral reef, but for like a kelp forest, okay? So this is what you would see off of the West Coast. We can think of Monterey Bay as a good example here. We have our kelp. We have different fish that are living in the kelp, rockfish, bass. We have some creatures that are down around the kelp forest floor, so sea urchins, starfish, etc. We also have our sea otter up here, and then finally the orca, which is going to be our apex predator. The key thing that we want to see here is that a food web is more complex than a food chain. So let's write this out. Food web are more complex than a food chain. A food chain just goes in one direction, one thing to the next, where the food web shows all the interactions. So a good example of this would be this kelp bass here. It shows the things that it eats by the arrows. The arrows going to it are the things that it eats, and the arrow going away from it are things that eat it. So in this case, the kelp bass, once it dies, might be eaten by the starfish. More interactions. The reason that sea otters are so important and why they're considered a keystone species is because they allow the kelp forest to keep its structure. And I'll explain that here in just a moment. So let's write sea otters are a keystone species. The thing that's happening with the sea otters here is that this connection right here, the sea urchins up to the sea otter, this is important because sea urchins will eat kelp. And you can follow the arrows here. The arrow going to the sea urchin means the sea urchin is going to eat the kelp. And specifically, the sea urchins can eat the kelp at the base. And if left unchecked, the sea urchins will completely destroy a kelp forest. All the kelp will be gone. It'll be eaten from the base, float away, no more kelp. And all these things that live in the kelp forest will be gone. The sea otter keeps the sea urchin population down. They eat sea urchins. So with the appropriate number of sea otters, they will keep sea urchins population low, which means the kelp will stay where it's supposed to be, not get overeaten. So let's add to this. So keystone species. With the keystone species, they're more important than the population numbers suggest. So even though there's not a lot of sea otters compared to some of the other creatures here, they're very important for the overall survival of the kelp forest. Let's look historically at what has happened to sea otters and why, one of the reasons why our kelp forests are in danger. This map is showing you areas of Alaska. So Alaska's up here and it comes down this coast a little bit. And then you've got Canada all through here. and then you've got Washington and Oregon right there. And what this map is showing you is all the different areas that were involved with the fur trade in the 17 and 1800s. So, primarily, the fur trade took place in the 17 and 1800s. They were selling sea otter fur to China. So sea otter pelts sold in China, among other places. China was close. They liked the fur, the sea otter fur, the pelts. They used them a lot. Other places had sea otter furs sent there as well, Europe and America, but the big market was China. Because of the overabundance of hunting on the sea otters, they almost went extinct. Almost caused sea otters to go extinct in Alaska and Canada. And like we said back here, if you're missing your sea otters, eventually you're going to have too many sea urchins that will eat away at the kelp forests. So, when the sea otters disappeared, so did the kelp forests. They started disappearing all along here, and the kelp forests were a major habitat for marine species along the coast. This actually shows in picture form down at the bottom, but also in an animated form here or in a cartoon form. With sea otters present, you see that the sea otters are going down. They're eating the urchins. So not an overpopulation of urchins. The kelp is healthy. Without sea otters absent, you have an overpopulation of sea urchins, and they chew off the bottoms of these kelp. So sea urchins chew through the holdfast. So these areas that are anchored to the rock by the kelp, those are called holdfast. That's where they're holding on and gripping the rock. The urchins eat right at the base of that, and then the whole frond just floats away and dies. And then you can see actual images of this down here, with and without. They're called urchin barrens when the urchins have eaten through the kelp forests. And again, the reason this is so important, kelp forests are home to many species. Very much like a coral reef. Coral reef is a home for many species, not just coral. Kelp forests are home to many species, not just the kelp and sea urchins and sea otters. All right, thank you very much.